Welcome back for video 5.2 of our Asteroids project. In this video, we're going to actually set up a wave spawning mechanic for the asteroids. The player is still invulnerable, the player doesn't respawn, the player doesn't die, and we don't have a UI yet, and those are coming in future videos, but we're going to get the core gameplay of Asteroids working, where it starts off easy with a few asteroids and it becomes increasingly more challenging. We left off with our experimenting with spawn locations, and this is going to be absolutely pivotal in our video today. The fact that we have these spawn locations working, because it's going to be essentially the process we use to automate creating new asteroids. And we won't need our little debug spawn key, and that spawn key could probably get us in trouble with some of how we code this. But with that, let's begin setting up and preparing for doing waves, but not surfing. So we left off, I had just disabled my gizmos code, and you probably should make sure it's disabled as well, because you don't want it. I mean, I know even if you turn it off, but you're gonna have gizmos on working in the scene. It's just a headache, and so turn them off. So let's go look at our instance variables and start kind of fleshing out some of the rest of the things that we need. So I've got my prefab section that we just did. For now, well, let's not put the UI stuff. Let's do our, let's call it game stats. These are our variables pertaining to what wave we're on, what the current score is, and how many lives we have left. Although we're not going to really do much with lives yet, that's coming, but it will be a thing. And then lastly, we need some of our wave variables. So these are the helper variables that we use to kind of control the spawning of waves. So we need a private Boolean called wave loading. And this is a variable used to provide a delay between spawning of waves. So we use this to... It's just to give the player like 3 seconds or so to fly around in an empty space, to be able to appreciate that we had just defeated some asteroids. Then we will do another private variable called wave prep timer. And this is how long until we spawn that next wave. And then another variable that we need, and I'm going to make it private because you really shouldn't be able to see it from much outside of here, but wave enemies left. How many enemies are left inside of the game? We'll set that to 0 here. And then some spawning wave arrays. And so these are going to be allow us to kind of define the initial settings of each wave. So we'll do wave data, big asteroids. We don't need the word per wave. And then we'll set that to be, so this is how many big asteroids you're going to get in each wave. So I'll set up the first 5 waves. So this is how many small asteroids will accompany those big asteroids at the initial spawning of each wave. So let's make like wave 3 kind of crazy. It's not a whole lot of big asteroids, but it's tons of smaller asteroids. So just trying to give my wave some different personalities. Wave 3 has a ton of little asteroids. The spawn distance is that how close to the edges are they allowed to spawn, that we're going to use in that random method where we picked the wave locations. The random positions. And then this one's going to be kind of optional if we really want to enforce it. It's basically a time limit for each wave. And we can think about what we really want to do with this. How we might choose to implement kind of like a time limit. So the idea would be that if you don't clear the asteroids within the time limit, it forces the next set of things to spawn. And let's add one more up here. Private float wave time left. Alright, so we've got all that set up. Now we need to actually kind of start building the ability to spawn waves. So let's kind of begin with the start method. Let's set up my initial wave. So we'll go with wave 0 because we're going to increment the wave before we spawn the next wave. So when we're ready for the wave to spawn, we add +1 to the wave, and then we run a method called spawn wave that we're going to have to write. So wave is going to start at 0. My wave prep timer is going to start at, we'll give the player maybe like half of a second before we spawn asteroids on them. Wave loading will be true because we're about to spawn the first wave of asteroids, and that's all we need for now. So let's add some code to the update method to actually kind of set up the act of spawning waves, and so that we can kind of see that. That's my little debug code there. We'll do it at the top of update. This will be my code for handling wave management. And so first up is if the wave prep timer is greater than 0 in any case. So you can see that we have a wave prep timer here. So basically the wave prep timer is how long of a delay until we pop these asteroids on the player. And so we'll just decrement that times that delta time. So we'll decrease the timer until we're ready to spawn some waves. Then let's actually begin the code for determining if we're ready to spawn a wave or not. So this is going to be tied to how many enemies are left. So if wave enemies left, if we have no enemies in the level, and our wave is not starting to load yet, then we need to get ready to spawn the next wave. So we'll say wave loading is true. Wave prep timer, we'll set it to 3 seconds. We have a, what was that one called up here? We had a wave time left. So we'll just clear out the enemy count and time left. This is just to be on the safe side. Technically, we may not need this, but I would rather just blank that out so there's no weird shenanigans. And so the idea is that you have defeated all the waves, and we haven't spawned the next wave yet. Let's put a to-do here because we would want to add some implementation. This is where we would do it, but I don't want to do that quite yet. And here's where we're actually going to spawn the wave. If I'll put it right here. So to actually spawn the wave, we're going to say if wave prep timer is less than or equal to 0, and the wave loading variable is true. So essentially, we're ready to spawn. We've been told to spawn the next wave, and that little 3-second delay has run out. We will do wave plus plus, and we'll run the command spawn wave, which does not exist yet, but it will. So let's go and add that. So we can actually kind of spawn enemies. And it doesn't really matter where we place it. Let's add some more comments here. And update. Let's put it right here before the draw gizmos. So we'll make a method called spawn wave, and it takes an integer of which wave to spawn. And then we'll just put a little debug command so we can actually watch it telling me that it's ready to spawn the wave. And actually, let's add a debug command up here as well. So like this is the code for you've cleared the wave. Let's just actually have it say cleared wave. So we can get some just debug text just to see that, you know, it's acknowledging that we've beat the wave. And so we got the spawning wave code here, and this is where it gets a little bit more I don't know, complex, because we've got to actually spawn all the different elements we need for our game. So let's start with some variables. I'm calling this num big asteroids to spawn. It's not the most elegantly named variable, but it's a descriptively named variable. Same deal with the small asteroids. Again, I'm choosing clarity of variable names over efficiency of typing. Now this variable wave index is help me to convert the wave number into an array index. And that's because arrays start at 0, but waves start at 1. And there's that inherent confusion between that. Like, humans start counting things from 1, so the first wave is actually position 0 in your array. So I'm just creating this helper variable called wave index so that I don't get confused whenever I'm trying to write the code to access these things that we created up here, this wave data. So like this is the first wave, but that's index 0, and that is kind of confusing. So I use this helper variable to keep my head on straight. And then this float will be the we'll call it edge distance, and that's the code that we just wrote for picking how close into the edge should we spawn an asteroid from. So let's start constructing these. Let's load the wave data from the arrays. So if wave is less than wave data, and let's just pick on big asteroids. So we got to kind of think a little bit to make sure that this if statement makes sense. Wave is going to be being passed in as 1. So I need to see, so the length of this array is 5. So I might need to actually think about switching this over to being, because if I want to spawn wave 5, it wouldn't make sense for me to say 5 is less than the length of big asteroids, because that wouldn't be the case. So let's go with wave index. If the wave index is less than the length, meaning I have data for this wave to spawn, And that's because if I make this an infinitely running game, what happens when I get to wave 6? I don't have anything inside this array for wave 6. And so I need to kind of then at that point come up with some kind of mathematical formula to determine what values I should use so that the game could scale infinitely. Or you could just program like 50 wave data and just say game over when you beat the 50th wave. But I'm going to actually try to just procedurally generate that. So if I have the data, I'm going to say num big asteroids to spawn will be set equal to wave data big asteroids at wave index. Then I'm going to do the same thing for small asteroids, wave data small asteroids at wave index. Edge distance is also one there. Wave data spawn distance. And this is actually a instance variable here, but wave time left. And that'll come from that as well. So we're going to load up all this. Now, you see that I set the wave time left, but I never actually set the enemies left. I'm going to have to handle that inside the enemy itself. And so we're going to go add that code later once I have finished out this. So the else case of this if will be to load these things up with values that I'm just going to kind of have to come up with. So my number of big asteroids, we could do 2 plus the wave divided by 2. So like if we're on wave 6, then that means I'll spawn 5 big asteroids. And that seems somewhat okay. I mean, I spawned a lot more here. You could play with this and have some kind of randomness to it. I'm just going to kind of procedurally generate it. Num small asteroids to spawn could be 1 plus the wave that we're on modulus 3. So like if you're on wave 7, the remainder of 7 divided by 3 is 1. So it will spawn 1 asteroid. If you're on wave 6, I'm sorry, it'll spawn 2 because that would have been 1. If you're on wave 6, it'll spawn 1 because there's no remainder. If you're on wave 5, it will spawn 2 because so it'll spawn a total of 3 because 2 plus 1. So that way I don't kind of like make this spawning 200 little asteroids, but it kind of keeps it between 1 and 3 each wave. Edge distance. Well, we could be just boring about that. We could try to come up with a formula, or we could just set it to 40% from the edge so that they can kind of spawn pretty close to you. And then wave time left. Oops. That one, so it kind of looks like I'm almost doing some kind of like maybe 50 plus the wave number times 2 times 20. So like when you're on wave 6, you would get 50 seconds plus 60 seconds, so 110 seconds. So we'll just go with 50 plus the wave that you're on times 10. So that way you would end up getting, you get 50 more seconds every wave, but it starts at 50. So that way we can at least allow the game to continue past what I have defined inside of those arrays. And now let's actually spawn everything. This is really the easy part. We just do some for loops. So we do for int I is 0 while I is less than the number of big asteroids to spawn, I++. We will then run we could do kind of what we did here. And that leads me to the question of if I want to make a separate method for spawning asteroids, which I probably could. We'll just do it right here. And we'll just call it spawn object, because it could conceivably spawn more than just asteroids. It could spawn enemy ships, it could spawn power-ups. So we'll just make it a little bit more general and allow it to spawn any object, which could also spawn players. And so we need to pass it a game object. We need to pass it a clear radius, how much we want it to be clear around. And then lastly, we would probably want a distance. And so the spawn object will just, we can call that whole method. So vector3 position equals boundary dots get random position, where we use our edge distance, and then we need to create that tag list again. So let's just steal that from down here. And then we need that clear radius, which we'll pass in. So once we've got our position, we will then actually instantiate it. So we'll instantiate the thing to spawn at position with quaternion identity for the rotation. So I'm basically replicating this my asteroid spawning code right here from the debug, but instead of having to use these 3 lines every time I want to spawn something, I just condensed it into this spawn object method, which is really simple and really small. But anytime I'm going to spawn something, I don't want to have to put these 3 lines. That gets kind of just cluttered. So number of big asteroids to spawn, we'll just use our spawn object method, passing it in the prefab for big asteroid. The clear radius, this could be dependent upon the actual asteroid itself. So if we want to have more space for a big asteroid, we can make it like like 1.2. And then the distance from the edge is coming from this edge distance. Then we're going to do the same thing for the small asteroids. But small asteroids don't need as much space to kind of spawn, so I can allow it to have a smaller size that it needs to check to make sure that it's clear with. So they're allowed to be a little bit smaller. And we can add some debug commands to just verify that all this is working. And so this is our command to actually spawn an entire wave. So it looks kind of complex, but really a lot of it is just us loading the information from those arrays and then actually going through and spawning them. I did make the spawn object method to make my life easier anytime I want to spawn something, which does mean I can clear up my little debug thing here. This spawning an asteroid, I could just switch it now to this spawn object method, where I can decide how much space I need it to spawn with. Alright, so all this should be sufficiently commented to make sense. We're done spawning the wave, and we just put a debug message to say that the wave has spawned. So that looks pretty solid. We do need to do a few more things to make all this work. Most notably, we have not dealt with this count of how many enemies are left. And that is an important part that we need to finish. So right underneath the spawn object, we're just going to add a method called public void change enemy count. And we'll have an amount here. And all it will do is count the wave enemies left, and it will modify it by that amount. The important thing, though, is when an asteroid dies, it can decrease the count, and when an asteroid is spawned, it can increase the count. And that's going to be essential to making sure that our game works right. So let's hit save. Now I've got to go implement this inside of my asteroids. So let's go over to the big asteroid script, which we haven't visited in a little while. So first up, in the start method, when this asteroid comes into existence, we need to reference the game manager. So we'll say game object. Well, actually, I guess it could technically be a level manager data type. So we can choose to either find it by name. I'm going to find it with tag. So I'm going to do find object with tag, not find objects plural, because that's going to return an array list. And we want to return the game controller. Make sure you spell that right. I'm going to check to see if it has two L's. It does, in fact, have two L's. Let's start the game object. And actually, come to think of it, we should probably make this a private variable to keep track of, because I don't want to have to search for it every single time. So it'll be a private game object. No, we'll just attach the script. We'll make it the level manager script. And we will instead query the component. So we'll do .get component level manager. So this is going to grab that script that's tracking the game, storing it to this new private variable we have called level manager, and then all we have to do is say manager dot change enemy count 1. And so I'm going to copy this because I'm going to use this also inside of the small asteroid. So let's hit save. Let's jump over to the small asteroid and do the same thing down here under gameplay stuff. So I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to need to make a new private level manager object called manager. And so now it's grabbing that thing and updating the count. We do need to change this when things die, though. So let's hit save. So I'm still in small asteroid. Let's go down to when it dies. The to-do add score and decrease enemy counts. Well, we can decrease the enemy count now. Still need to do score at some point. Save again. Going to big asteroid. Going to where it dies. To do add score and decrease enemy counts. We'll do that right there. Very important that we increase this or decrease this count after we've spawned the small asteroids, because keep in mind the act of spawning these small asteroids is going to increase that count by +3 in this case. So if we were to decrease by 1 right here, what could happen is we might reach 0 at that moment and the game would think we beat the wave, but yet we still are about to spawn 3 more asteroids. And so we can hit save, and so the enemy count should be changing appropriately. You will have to do this to any extra enemy you wish to add to the game that tracks for purposes of the wave advancing. So if you were to add an enemy spaceship, you would still have to do the same thing if you wanted the wave to count it for purposes of beating the level. Now, it could be such the case that you add an enemy spaceship that does not count the level, so it will persist. So maybe it'll continue to annoy the player until it dies, which could be an interesting game choice. So let's see if this works. Save them all again, go back to Unity, and we should see a whole bunch of new variables appear here. wave 0, score 0, and then if I expand these out, I can actually see these things inside the editor, so I can play around with them if I wanted to. Hit play. And we can see down here it said that I cleared wave 1. Uh-oh. So we've got something happening here. These waves are kind of spawning. So we need to kind of take a look to see what might be causing the fact that spawned wave 1 spawned, and then immediately we beat wave 1. That seems not good. And so that's going to probably be a problem with this level manager here. And could that be related to, let's see, we increment the wave here. And it is possible that maybe, this is a very interesting scenario. I think what's actually happening is this enemy count has not been updated when this leaves the code and it's triggering a wave clear again. So I think the solution would be to actually move this active spawning the wave to under it, so that it will finish checking everything and then it will increment to the next wave. Well, let's test. So we hit play, spawning wave 1 has spawned, and it's not actually popping the next wave out. So we might not have caused that same problem. And so we can defeat these enemies. Perhaps I should have had a debug out and print how many enemies left. So when I defeat this asteroid, it should say wave 1 cleared down there. And it does. It's going to give me 3 seconds till the next wave spawns, and it spawns the next wave. And so this should continue to work. A few little tweaks to it that we could add, and I'll probably add those in a separate optional video, where we reset the player back to the center of the screen, and then also where I implement the wave timer as a alternate way to kind of punish the player, essentially. If time runs out and you didn't kill all the enemies, it's going to then pop the next wave on you. Because right now we're not doing anything with that wave timer, but that could be an interesting thing to add. And so we'll do that in kind of like an optional choice here. So I'm going to take out these debug commands just so that we don't have to remember to check them later. No, we could be fancier about that. Let's just make a variable here called private int debug. We'll set it to 0. And then we can turn on all of these things if debug is greater than 1. Let's rename it to debug mode, just to be on the safe side. So if debug mode is greater than 1, it'll do these little printouts. So there's 3 of them that we have to hit. 2 of them in spawn wave, and 1 of them inside of update. And if we wanted to add a 3rd one just to kind of test things, we could add one here where we print out how many enemies are left. So then we can then say wave enemies left. So every time that updates, we would actually see that. And then we can turn all of our debugs off and on relatively quickly. Unfortunately, I did make this greater than 1, so I should probably switch these to greater than or equal to 1. Small oversight. So now all my debug modes say greater than or equal to 1. So if I switch debug mode to 1, hit save, and it should have all those texts again. And it should also pop up the enemies spawning here. And we can see enemies left is 2. When I defeat this, it jumps up to, so enemy is 2, it goes down to 1, and then counts back up to 4 because it spawned some asteroids, but my lasers killed a few of them. I do see it creeping down to 0 momentarily, but that didn't seem to trigger the wave clear, so I don't think it should be a serious issue. And then we can see the wave spawn and all that's working. And so if we wanted to turn it all back off again, we can set debug mode back down to 0, and then we don't have to go through commenting and uncommenting things to get that to reappear. And that could be a very valuable feature for testing, because now the console is not going to spam me. And so we'll conclude it here. I will do an optional video for if we want to actually implement a time limit so that we can see time counting down, and then see how that could impact our gameplay. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more and the conclusion of this in the next 2 or 3 videos.